If you continue north past Cheticamp to Pleasant Bay, through Pleasant Bay, on through Red River, past Gampo Abbey, the Shambhala Buddhist Monastery, you'll find the trail to Polletts Cove. It's a bit of a challenging hike, and many people will choose to camp this, but it's doable in a day. This area is remote. One reason the Shambhala Buddhists built Gampo Abbey near here was because it was a place to get as far away from the hustle and bustle of towns and cities as possible. The Polletts Cove Trail is not a provincial or federal trail. There isn't even really a trail group that tends it. So you'll want to be ready for variable conditions along the trail. It's around 7 kilometers to Polletts Cove along this route. But with the terrain, it can sometimes feel like much, much more. Because this trail is so tough, some people will choose to camp at Polletts Cove itself for a few days and explore the area around there. But it is very doable in one day. In fact, people with many different levels of experience accomplish it. Just be sure you're prepared. There's no cell service in the area if you need help. Now, there are 2 other ways to get to Polletts Cove. One is by boat directly to the cove. There are no official boat services, but you can sometimes find someone for hire in a nearby town. That usually involves hiking back, so you're going to be hiking either way. There's also an even more difficult hike that you can take to Polletts Cove from Meat Cove. If this route looks challenging, the one from Meat Cove takes anywhere from 2 to 4 days for the most experienced hikers. It's probably no surprise that the cove this trail ends at, and in fact much of the land the hike crosses, was first inhabited by the Mi'kmaq. In a 1780 book, Ensign S.W. Preddy's of the 84th Regiment of Foot wrote about the cove and his experience being shipwrecked in Cape Breton and rescued by the Mi'kmaq. But it was over 100 years later before there was a formal European settlement in the cove. Donald MacLean and his 3 sons arrived from Scotland, speaking Gaelic. 2 of his sons drowned in the cove as adults, and one of them, Duncan, had received the first land grant in the area in 1861. By 1890, 8 families lived in Polletts Cove. Over time, this small community housed a post office, a school, and a fishing facility. There were, of course, also burial grounds, but by 1921, the census showed only 1 family still living in Polletts Cove. And as you'll get to see, it's not the easiest place to get to, so living there would have been tough. There are records of a family living in the cove until the 1930s, though it seems it was left abandoned after that. Though during World War II, a telegraph line was set up to warn of German U-boats in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. There is nothing left of the town of Polletts Cove anymore. In 1947, wildfires destroyed the remaining buildings, and with it, the reminders of what was once a small community. This is one of 2 mountains you have to climb over in order to get to Polletts Cove. Some people call this climb Heart Attack Hill. I'm going to try and avoid that fate. I mentioned earlier that this trail is neither a provincial trail nor a federal trail. In fact, most of it crosses private land. And there's an interesting story behind that. The story of a 27-year-old lottery winner who wanted to protect this land for future generations when the province turned down the opportunity. Polletts Cove is surrounded by the Polletts Cove Aspey Bay Wilderness Area. That's provincial. And the Cape Breton Highlands National Park, federal. The Polletts Cove land includes over 300 acres, a 3,000-foot beach, 2 rivers, waterfalls, meadows, and so much more. all undisturbed since the former community had been abandoned. In 2007, the land was put up for sale to the public at a price of $1.65 million after attempts to sell it to the province for inclusion in the wilderness area failed. A public group came forth called Friends of Polletts Cove, hoping to find a way to preserve and protect the cove. So in stepped a 27-year-old Lotto 649 winner by the name of Matthew Moore, a nearby resident, and he purchased the land. In a statement to the local newspaper at the time, Matthew said, quote, "It is a very important day for Pleasant Bay, Nova Scotia, and for the whole of Canada. No foreigners have a chance to ruin something that I and members of my community hold closely as one of the most beautiful areas in the world. Farmers will not have to worry about their cattle and horses needing a new location to graze." And with that, Matthew made the land, while still private, accessible to all for the long term. Without question, Matthew's decision to purchase the Polletts Cove land was very well received in the community. No longer was there a fear of Polletts Cove becoming a golf club or some kind of private enclave for the rich and famous. You know, what's really interesting is, since 1861, when the McLeans got the Polletts Cove deed, there had only been two families who had ever owned land in there, at least deeded land, the McGregors and the McLeans. So with Matthew's purchase, he became only the third family since 1861 to hold a deed in Polletts Cove. Hey, remember when I said that there were two mountains you had to cross in order to get to Polletts Cove on this hike? That's number 2. Despite being so remote, this trail is far better used than you might think. If you come here in summer, you can be almost assured of passing hikers and campers as they come in and out of Polletts Cove along the trail. And in the distance, you can see the goal, Polletts Cove. This is Otter Brook, and once I cross this brook and over the next hill, it's Polletts Cove. The Polletts Cove Aspy Fault Wilderness Area was designated in 1999 and expanded in 2015 with the addition of islands and a barrier beach. It's the largest wilderness area in Cape Breton. It's a diverse mix of highlands, forest canyons, and barrens. Its purpose is to protect a mix of ancient features, as well as animals and plants that reside in this, one of Nova Scotia's most remote regions. This area includes barrier beaches and islands, all protected. While the Polletts Cove parcels are private, they were purchased with the intent of preventing development, so it also aids in protecting these lands. There are community plans through the Seawall Trail Society to build a multi-day hiking trail across the wilderness area. Otter Brook winds its way through the Cape Breton highlands to this spot. On a clear day, you can see seals and sometimes whales playing in the water. Otter Brook is also the one river crossing on this hike. As you can see, people camp all along this trail. You know, they'll turn this hike into something that's a few days long and start exploring upriver, for example. There are many rare species in this area. The endangered Bicknell's thrush, which is one of Canada's rarest songbirds, is found here. Plants like the rare maidenhair, green spleenwort ferns, and lichens like the eastern waterfan are also found in this wilderness area. In the winters, this area sees very heavy snowfall, something which helps protect the lynx, which is endangered in Nova Scotia. One thing about hiking along Cape Breton's coasts is the weather can change constantly. When I started at the beginning of this, it was really cold and I had many layers. And now I'm starting to get warm even though I've dropped a few layers. Always be prepared. And this should be the last climb before I reach Polletts Cove. Along this trail, you go through a lot of different landscapes. This is another one of those informal campsites that have popped up all along the Polletts Cove Trail. You can see that it's been used fairly recently. Wow, simply stunning. That's Polletts Cove. As it happens, there is one small orphan parcel of land in this area currently for sale. It's about 25 acres and it looks down on the cove. It's selling for $150,000 Canadian. If you buy it, you will only be able to access it by boat or this trail. Roads and electricity are not permitted here. Polletts Cove sits at the base of Bald Mountain. Now, people who come and camp here for a night or two will often take the 45-minute hike to get to the summit. But today I'm just doing a day hike to Polletts Cove, so I won't have time for that. Such a calm blue expanse today. 300 kilometers to the west is the Gas Peninsula in Quebec. Between here and there, the only land, the Magdalen Islands. You will hear online about the horses of Polletts Cove, and there are horses here. Unfortunately, there were none to greet me today. You'll also read that the horses are wild, like the Sable Island ponies, but they aren't. They are owned by people who live in the area, and they're farm bred. But the horses are left to roam here throughout the summer and fall. They become used to people around and are known to explore unattended campsites and even try to steal backpacks. They are friendly, but if you do camp here and find your camp a little worse for wear, chances are it wasn't the bears, but the horses. The Polletts Cove horses seem a little shy today, but there's certainly evidence of them all over the place. This place is absolutely stunning. It's no wonder that people are willing to hike across multiple mountains just to come here and see it. Such a place is rare anywhere. And these mountains, well, they protect this place. And for the same reason that the mountains made it impossible to have a successful community here, they now keep this a peaceful, remote, and secluded place. One of the most remote places in all of Nova Scotia. And of course, it's also thanks to 27-year-old Matthew Moore, a lottery winner who had the vision to protect this place for generations. You know, looking out, it's not surprising that people would want to spend a few days here camping and exploring the various trails, the mountains, the river valleys. sort of a respite from the world. I've chosen to come out here in fall, and that means the days are a little bit shorter, so it's time for me to head back towards Cheticamp, and that means going back out on the trail I came in on. It's a cold, wet, and windy morning that finds me in Cheticamp on Cape Breton's western shore this morning, and so I'm warming up with a coffee first at Frog Pond Cafe. Cheticamp was founded upon fishing. There was a cod liver oil plant here at one time, but also a big industry was mining, gold and gypsum. And in fact, it's the legacy of gypsum mining that brings me to my hike very close to the town center today. The Cheticamp Harbor Boardwalk is the start of a multi-use trail that takes you all the way up to Gypsum Mine Lake, which is a popular spot for Instagrammers and for swimming. Now, many people will go and hike the Gypsum Mine Lake Trail and start about 1.5 kilometers away from the actual mine. But that's not where it starts. It actually starts here, which is more of a 5-kilometer hike. Gypsum Mine Lake itself is found in an area called Bell Marsh, which literally translates to a pleasant walk. And despite the windy and damp conditions today, that's exactly what I'm expecting. The trail follows the old rail line through Cheticamp. It's the same corridor that once took plaster and gypsum from the mine to ships docked not far from here to take mine product abroad. The Gypsum Mine Trail project was started in 2009 by the Cheticamp Economic Council, and parts are still a work in progress. Eventually, they hope to connect the trail to a multi-use trail around the Cabot Trail, linking to the International Appalachian Trail and the Trans-Canada Trail. After leaving the boardwalk, you'll find the start of the trail between an old closed service station and an old closed liquor store on Cheticamp's main road. Over time, the hope is to make the start of that trail much more obvious. The story of the mine is intertwined with the early 1900s history of Cheticamp. In 1907, the Great Northern Mining Company was incorporated to develop the mine. They issued 2 million shares, each with the value of $1. The mine had been financed by a combination of the shares and a loan. The company defaulted on the loan, and the loan holder, a Mr. O'Neill of Montreal, took over the mine. Ultimately, he too was unable to pay workers, and the debt from building the railway was a massive burden. By 1914, the mill simply couldn't pay the bills. Others stepped in, and in 1923, the International Gypsum Company attempted to run the mine, but they too were unsuccessful in making the mine financially viable. Finally, another company, this time out of Boston, called the Atlantic Gypsum Company, rented the mine with an option to buy it. Instead of making plaster, they only produced raw gypsum. This was a success, and in 1928, Atlantic Gypsum exercised their option to buy the mine. Transportation of the gypsum plaster from the mine to the harbor was done mostly by using horses along old roads. The plaster was then taken to markets such as Quebec. And why Quebec? Well, Quebec was one of the largest markets accessible to Cheticamp by sea. By 1911, horses just were not cutting it, and so a railroad was built. And this trail is on the remains of the old rail bed. This is where most people actually start the Gypsum Mine Lake Trail. It's about 1 kilometer, maybe a little bit more, until I reach the lake. Only 4 years after Atlantic Gypsum exercised their option to buy the mine, it was becoming difficult to find markets for Cheticamp gypsum. It was no longer the best available quality. They began selling to Britain where the standards were lower, and this worked for a time. And for a while, Cheticamp Harbor was bustling with large cargo ships coming and going with loads of gypsum for foreign shores. Over time, a whole network of trails has developed across the Cape Breton Highlands. And this one here along the Acadian Trail can take you all the way to Wreck Cove, which is on the other side of the Cape Breton Highlands. That would be a long hike. This is Gypsum Mine Lake. The lake is actually formed by waters of the surrounding mountain coming in and filling the former mine cavity. This has become a really popular swimming spot, and the water is really clear, but it's a little bit cold for that today. It's amazing looking around and thinking back to a time when this was a busy operating mine, with trains running in and out, and for a period of time, even the production of plaster here being shipped all over the world. This lake is believed to be between 75 and 150 feet deep, and at the bottom of the lake, much of the old mine equipment still remains. In 1936, National Gypsum, a company that has many operations in Nova Scotia, took over the mine. It was yet another owner. But 3 years later, in 1939, World War II brought the final end to the Cheticamp mine. Another gypsum mine operated in Dingwall, Cape Breton, and that one ultimately closed too. National Gypsum, however, still remains in Nova Scotia, with a massive mine near Milford, near the Halifax airport. The best hiking and exploring locations often come as a result of change. In one place, a community was lost to a forest, and a 27-year-old lottery winner purchased the land, not for development, but to save it for future generations to hike and explore in one of the most secluded and remote places of all Nova Scotia. And here, a gypsum mine is reclaimed by the mountain waters, making it a popular hiking and swimming spot in a place called Bell Marsh. You have to wonder whether the person who named it had any idea that this place would indeed one day become a pleasant walk. Wherever your next walkabout takes you, remember the words of C.S. Lewis when he said, "There are far better things ahead than anything you left behind."
Sunshine.